But first, let's get into this breaking news. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has released a statement saying that Hamas is backing out of elements of the hostage deal. This deal was celebrated globally today, and it's now in disarray. It faces a major stumbling point. The deal was scheduled to be put to the Israeli cabinet right now as we speak, 11 a.m. local time in Israel. But now the cabinet will not meet to vote on the deal until Hamas agrees to all existing elements. The Israeli Prime Minister's office has released a statement tonight saying Hamas is backing out of the explicit understandings agreed upon with the mediators and Israel in a last-minute blackmail attempt. Israel will not set a date for a cabinet and government meeting until the mediators announce that Hamas has approved all the details of the agreement. I understand, and I've got this firsthand from the Prime Minister's office, that also playing into this decision was that there was rocket fire from Hamas in Gaza, both last night in Israel and this morning. This is not in the spirit of a ceasefire deal and a hostage release agreement. So that rocket fire has also played into this move. Now, this shouldn't be a surprise. Hamas is a terrorist group. It's a bad faith negotiator, a bad faith actor. Israel has had this very deal on the table since May 2024, and Hamas only came to the negotiating table at the 11th hour because Donald Trump said he'd unleash hell. Now, we had been expecting to hear from Benjamin Netanyahu after cabinet met. That would have been in the next couple of hours, but this is a huge delay now. And it will be a massive disappointment for the family members of hostages who've now been held in Gaza for 467 days. Now, while there is a pause in the deal, it could still go ahead if Hamas agrees to, well, stop firing rockets and agrees to the existing points on the table. If Hamas does that, if this deal is back on the table, this is how it will play out. There'll be 3 hostages, expected to be women who'll be released this Sunday. Then 7 days later, there'll be another 4 hostages released. So that's 7 days in between hostages. After that, 3 hostages will be released every 7 days. And then after nearly 6 weeks, there'll be 14 hostages freed. So in total, in this first stage of the deal, that would be 33 hostages released. And we know, sadly, that not all are alive. For some families, there would be beautiful reunions with their loved ones, but for others, they'd be welcoming home dead bodies. Now, this is one of the sticking points currently of the negotiation. This is why the hostage deal is up in the air, because Israel was meant to have veto power on all of the hardened terrorists that would have been released from their own prisons. So in Israeli prisons, there are Palestinian criminals and terrorists. For the 33 humanitarian hostages that Hamas was releasing, and these are women and children, Israel was going to have to release, or will have to release, 1,000 Palestinian criminals from Israeli prisons. And that includes at least 250 terrorists who are said to have had blood on their hands. Now, Israel has insisted in these negotiations on having the veto power over which terrorists are released, which of the worst terrorists are released. Hamas at this late hour is now insisting on trying to dictate who'll be released from Israeli prisons. Even then, Israel has said they're not going to free them into Gaza, that they would want the hardened criminals who are serving life sentences, if they are released, to be sent to a third country, sent overseas. Now, just this evening on Sky, on Chris Kenny's program, Liberal MP Julian Leeser said that he wants a guarantee from Anthony Albanese that Australia won't be taking in these hardened Palestinian criminals. Have a look.
So I think the Prime Minister has to make it very clear, because those freed Palestinian prisoners, many of whom have committed violent crimes, are due to be sent to a third country. And I want the Prime Minister to guarantee to all Australians that he will not bring any Palestinian prisoner who spent time in an Israeli jail to Australia, because that will do nothing to make this country safer for all Australians.
It's a very important point, and we do as Australians need that guarantee from the Prime Minister. Now, this deal, if it does go ahead, and we expect ultimately it probably will, given Trump has threatened to unleash hell, this is a deal with the devil. It's far from what you'd call a good deal. It's deeply unjust because there's no equivalence between innocent hostages and terrorists in prison. I mean, on the one hand, you have babies, children, mothers, sons, the elderly, all of them innocent Israelis who've been kidnapped. They're not prisoners of war. They should never have been abducted. There's no justice here. But this is a deal that Israel felt it had to do to bring its people home, even though it's far from perfect. There will be happy reunions. There will be moments of pure joy in the weeks ahead, but there'll also be incredible distress. No question. When we learn that some hostages who we prayed were alive were in fact killed by Hamas. And I can say I'm definitely not looking forward to the sight of innocent, beautiful people coming home in body bags. But that is what we're facing now, and it will be a difficult time. Now, one of those who was set to be the first to be released in this first stage of the deal is Keith Siegel. He's the beloved husband of Aviva Siegel, who I met when I was in Israel. He's 65 and he spent 15 months now in cruel captivity. Aviva was also held hostage for 54 days, and she spoke about the cruel way Keith was treated.
And we were just taken from our house in such a brutal way. On the way, they pushed Keith and broke his ribs and shot us. I remember seeing the bullets coming very close to my foot. I'm lucky, but they shot Keith on his hand. So we arrived in Gaza while Keith was bleeding, and he was in such pain. The conditions were the worst conditions that you can think about. I just thought that I'm going to die, that Keith's going to die. And just think about it. When they, in such a brutal way, tortured my husband that I've been married to for 45 years, I wanted to scream and cry, and I wasn't allowed to cry or scream. I just had to keep myself quiet.
Aviva and her family, they are warriors. Aviva has not stopped campaigning for the release of her husband and of all of the hostages, and we pray that Keith will be alive when he's returned to her. We just don't know. Now, it was incoming President Donald Trump who first broke the news that a deal had been done, and he posted on social media saying, "We have a deal for the hostages in the Middle East. They will be released shortly. Thank you." But Joe Biden, of course, claimed that it was to his credit, and he said this would be a permanent end to the war.
Phase 2, which is a permanent end of the war. Let me say it again, a permanent end of the war. There are a number of details to negotiate to move from Phase 1 to Phase 2, but the plan says if negotiations take longer than 6 weeks, the ceasefire will continue as long as the negotiations continue.
Now, that's wrong, as I'll explain in a moment, but Albanese also celebrated this ceasefire. Have a look.
I certainly hope and have consistently called for a lowering of the temperature here. Australians, I believe, wanted to see the hostages released. They want to see an end to conflict. They also don't want conflict brought here. This is not the end, importantly. This is a really important breakthrough and step forward.
Peter Dutton, in much stronger comments, spoke about how much Israelis have been through over the past 15 months.
We should never forget the carnage that took place on October 7, when Hamas, a listed terrorist organisation, went in, slaughtered, raped, pillaged the kibbutzes, the music festival where young people were struck down in their prime. Some of these people will be released shortly. They've been in captivity and in the hands of these barbarians for about 14 months. It is horrific, and we should never forget that. And the fact that they're still held hostage and haven't been released by now is an absolute disgrace.
So, as you just saw there from Joe Biden, there's naive politicians who are celebrating like it's the end of the war. But it's only a temporary ceasefire, if we even get one. Trey Yingst from Fox News reported today that Hamas is still thriving in Gaza, their green flag still waving on the streets.
Inside Gaza, we've seen scenes from the city of Deir al-Balah in the center part of the Gaza Strip. Many Palestinians celebrating there, and video of Hamas gunmen parading through the streets. The reality on the ground is that Hamas remains in power, and Biden's own Secretary of State just yesterday said that they have recruited just as many fighters as they have lost.
And as he says, there is also unverified footage on social media that purports to show Palestinians and Hamas celebrating. But they shouldn't be celebrating, because having Hamas in power isn't good for the Palestinians, and it's certainly not good for Israel. So despite Biden and even Albanese's declarations, this hostage deal and temporary ceasefire doesn't mean it's the end of the war, because Donald Trump has repeatedly vowed to help Israel defeat Hamas and terrorism, and he means it. He will empower Israel rather than work against it and try to obstruct it, like Joe Biden did with Netanyahu. Now, there is some really sad news. Last night, I was very hopeful that the Bibas family might be brought home. But high-level sources told me today that actually Israel isn't hopeful that they'll be returned alive. It's thought, and this is what the belief is in Israel, that the father may be alive, but not baby Kafir, brother Ariel, or mother Shiri. This beautiful family and these beautiful little boys, they had everything to live for. They had their whole lives ahead of them. And they're now presumed by Israel to be dead. This isn't confirmed. It's not confirmed. This is just what Israeli intelligence believes. I hope they're wrong. With all my heart, I hope they're wrong. But I'm reporting what high-level Israeli sources, trusted sources, have told me today. Now, like I said, this is going to be a really, really tough and emotional 6 weeks. It's going to be an emotional roller coaster. It's a tortured process where we may wait anxiously for an entire week for 3 hostages to be returned home, to find that only bodies are returned home. But among the pain, there will be joyous reunions and incredible celebrations. And we at least look forward to the pure elation at families being reunited after terrorism cruelly tore them apart along 467 days ago.